Carolyn Braden from Louisville, Kentucky. I make jewelry. I make abstract paintings. And I even make my own paper. But today, I'm going to be making the Shibori wall hanging. When I'm not making my shibori or jewelry, I love hanging out with my husband Tommy and jumping on the trampoline. I'd love to jump around all day, but I wouldn't get my shibori done. I need to get to my studio. Konnichiwa. Welcome to my studio. This is where I make my shibori happen. The first thing I need to do to make my shibori wall hanging is to measure and cut some fabric. Shibori is a type of Japanese dyeing. It's where Americans get tie-dyeing from. I've gone ahead and cut two 18 by 34 inch pieces of fabric. One is going to serve as the background for the wall hanging, and the other is going to be the background for the design. Now I'm going to make three 10-inch squares and three 6-inch squares of fabric. And this is my assistant, Phoebe. She helps me with all my crafts. Now I need to twist and bind my 6-inch squares. Twisting and binding the fabric is a traditional shibori technique. I invented this technique myself. It turns out kind of like a flower a little bit. So what I'll do is I twist it from the center up into a little cone shape. Then I will take some dental floss and I will start twisting the dental floss around and binding it through that. I've got my three 6-inch squares twisted and bound. Now I need to twist and bind my 18 by 34 inch piece of fabric on this PVC pipe. Now I need to take a piece of nylon twine and twist it around this piece of fabric on the pole. I need to twist the fabric onto the pole. This method is called ruching. It twists the fabric and binds it a little bit tighter for the dyeing process. I've got my 6-inch squares and my pole bound, and I'm going to leave my 10-inch squares loose so they can be dyed a solid blue. Now it's dye time. In order to start the dye process, I need several materials before I can get started. I need a 1/3 cup soda ash, 1 cup of dye, and 3 cups of salt. Dyeing can be pretty messy. I'm going to need some protective gear. Now I'm going to wet out the material. Wetting out the fabric allows the dye to disperse more evenly into the material. While my fabric is being wet out for 15 minutes, I'm going to make my dye bath. I've got 3 cups of salt, which I'm going to dissolve into 4.5 gallons of water. Now I'm going to add 1 cup of dye. The next thing I'm going to do is put my wetted out fabric into the dye bath. I'm going to let it soak for 10 minutes. Because I'm using soda ash, I'm going to need to use more protective gear. Before adding the soda ash to the dye bath, I need to move the material from the dye bath to the empty bucket. Adding soda ash to the dye bath helps make the dye adhere better to the material. Now I'm going to add my fabric back to the dye bath. I'm going to let it soak for 1 hour. My fabric has soaked for 1 hour. Now it's time to see what it looks like. All my material is dry and I've ironed it. Now I'm going to use these squares that I've cut to fuse to the back of the material using the iron. I'm going to use scissors to trim off the excess material. I'm going to stretch out some plain fabric onto the stretcher bars that I purchased from my local art supply store. Now that I've stapled the backing on, I'm going to attach the shibori dye material over this background. It's time to stitch the squares. I learned to do shibori from one of my college teachers in one of my art classes, and I've been hooked ever since. going to add a decorative glass bead. I've finished stitching my squares and I'm going to attach them to the background. I'm using multicolored embroidery floss as a thread to stitch my squares onto the material. Ta-da! My Shibori wall hanging is complete. It's going to look great on my wall.